Okay, so just having a bit of a deeper delve into the under the hood, the machine learning that goes into Sentinel. So UEBA, so it's user and identity behavior analytics. So it's basically what Sentinel does with the raw data and the sort of profiling it does on there. So it will work out, who the user is, who that user has interaction with, the user's blast radius. So what access does that user have access to across the environments being monitored by Sentinel, IP addresses of devices that user's using, geolocation. So that's a frequent thing you'll see raised by Sentinel. You'll have a log on, for example, from a user in the UK, and then maybe half an hour later, that user may have logged on in a different geographic location that is impossible to travel to in that time scale. So that's where the geolocation rules will come in, and it will flag that as a risk. And also things like behavior profiling. So what does that specific user generally access historically in their day-to-day role? So, potentially if they're accessing a highly sensitive server for the first time, in the last 2 months, then that could contribute towards the overall sort of threat analysis that Sentinel's looking at. And on the next slide, so we've got an example of the raw data and how this gets broken down. So on working from left to right, you can see the raw data being fed into Sentinel. So you've got, timestamps, IP addresses, usernames, servers, and logon types. And this is where Sentinel will start breaking this down into separate pieces of information that it can evaluate. So you've got the kind of user information there. So, name, email address, what they do, their blast radius, when the account was last used, and looking at the devices that that user ID is being used to log into. So in this specific example, you can see that the user's blast radius is high, so he's a help desk technician, so presumably he's got admin access to a number of different systems across the estate, and it's a dormant account as well, so it's not being used between those two dates there, so July 2019 through till March 2020. The device he's connecting to is a finance server, so high value asset. It's got the IP address details in there. The location that this data is coming in from is Shanghai in China. And behavior analytics, looking at that, that's the first time that Jeff has accessed that specific server. No one Jeff works with has accessed that server before, and it's only accessed by 4 users in the organization. And it's also the first time that that user's connected from Shanghai, and no other user in the organization connects from Shanghai. So that will give you, a sort of example of the type of data that comes in and how it's expanded out by Sentinel to make some sense of it. And then you can see the anomaly and insights on the far right. It's got, the user role, the fact that the account's been dormant recently. He's got a high blast radius. He's got access to lots of systems. It's an unusual location. So all of that information's been expanded out into essentially an incident that does look like suspicious activity.